Step out of the vehicle right now. That car doesn't belong to you.
Deputy, are you detaining me based on evidence or based on your assumptions?
I'm not arguing with you. License and registration.
On one side was a sheriff's deputy who thought he could control the situation the same way he always had. Loud voice, fast commands, pressure, fear. But this time, the woman sitting behind the wheel was not confused about her rights. She was not afraid to ask questions, and she knew the law better than the people trying to use it against her. What started as a simple stop outside a gas station would soon turn into a public scandal, an internal investigation, and a lawsuit worth millions of dollars. And the worst part for the department. Before we continue, I want to know something. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city and state down in the comments. And if you believe no badge should place someone above the Constitution, make sure you hit subscribe right now. Because the story you're about to hear is not just another traffic stop gone wrong. This is what happens when power meets someone who refuses to be intimidated. Every second of it was caught on camera. By the end of this story, one deputy would lose far more than his badge, and an entire department would be forced to answer questions it had avoided for years. So stay with me, because what happens next changes everything. Judge Alana Brooks did not become a federal judge because she knew the right people or played political games. She earned that seat after spending more than 20 years fighting some of the toughest civil rights cases in the country. Long before she ever stepped into a federal courtroom as a judge, she was already known as one of the sharpest constitutional lawyers in her state. Her work focused on unlawful arrests, illegal searches, and police officers who crossed the line and believed nobody would challenge them. And many times, Judge Brooks was the person who did. She had argued major Fourth Amendment cases in front of appellate courts, where every word mattered, and every mistake could change a person's life forever. Lawyers who faced her in court learned very quickly that she missed nothing. Prosecutors feared how precise she was. Defense attorneys respected the way she remembered every detail. Even experienced officers became careful when her name appeared on a case file, because there was one thing nearly everyone agreed on. If Judge Brooks said someone's constitutional rights had been violated, she could explain exactly how it happened, exactly where the law was broken, and exactly who would be held responsible for it. She was calm under pressure, patient when others lost control, and she had spent years watching officers make the same dangerous mistakes again and again. That experience gave her something most people never have during a police stop. She knew the system from the inside. She knew the language officers used. She knew the tricks. And most importantly, she knew what happened when an officer pushed too far while a camera was recording everything. Deputy Daniel Hargrove had no idea who he was about to confront that night. But within minutes, his entire career would begin falling apart. It was a quiet Thursday evening just after sunset. The roads were calm, and most people in the area were already heading home for the night. Judge Alana Brooks had just finished speaking at a legal conference downtown. For nearly 2 hours, she had talked about civil rights, police accountability, and the growing use of body cameras during traffic stops. The event had gone longer than expected, and she still had paperwork waiting at home. On her way back, she stopped at a gas station near one of the richest neighborhoods in the county. Nothing about the moment stood out. She pulled her black Mercedes beside a pump, paid for gas, and checked a few messages on her phone while the tank filled. A few people walked in and out of the station store. Cars passed slowly on the road nearby. It looked like any normal evening. As she finished pumping gas, her phone rang. It was one of her court clerks calling about a hearing scheduled for the next morning. Judge Brooks stood beside her car for a few minutes, calmly going over notes while drivers moved through the station around her. Then she ended the call, stepped back into her vehicle, and prepared to leave. That was the moment Deputy Daniel Hargrove noticed her. First, he noticed the expensive car. Then he noticed the black woman sitting behind the wheel, and within seconds, his entire attitude changed. Witnesses would later say the deputy slowed his patrol vehicle the moment he saw her. His eyes stayed fixed on the Mercedes, as if something about it immediately bothered him. He had no report of a stolen vehicle, no traffic violation, no emergency call, just an assumption. And before the night was over, that assumption would destroy everything he had spent 18 years building. Deputy Daniel Hargrove had worn the sheriff's uniform for almost 20 years. Around the department, many younger deputies saw him as experienced and confident. He knew the streets, knew the neighborhoods, and knew how to control a traffic stop with a loud voice and strong commands. At least, that was the image he liked to project. But behind the scenes, his record told a different story. Over the years, Several citizens had filed complaints against him for what the department called aggressive conduct during traffic stops. Drivers claimed he often became hostile very quickly, especially when people questioned his authority or asked basic legal questions. Most of those complaints went nowhere. Two of them accused him of racial profiling after stops involving black drivers in wealthy areas. In both cases, the department said there was not enough evidence to support disciplinary action. Another complaint involved an unlawful vehicle search during a late-night stop. According to the driver, Hargrove searched the car without consent and without probable cause. But supervisors later dismissed the case after reviewing only part of the body camera footage. Inside the department, some deputies quietly warned new officers about him. They said Hargrove had a habit of pushing situations further than necessary. He liked control, he liked compliance, and he did not react well when people challenged him. Still, none of those earlier complaints caused real damage to his career. No suspension, no major discipline, no public attention. Because most of the people he stopped did not have the money, power, or legal knowledge to fight back once the encounter ended. And after years without serious consequences, Hargrove had grown comfortable. Too comfortable. By the time he pulled into that gas station parking lot and saw Judge Alana Brooks sitting inside the Mercedes, he believed this stop would go exactly like all the others. Quick, one-sided, and fully under his control. He was wrong. Deputy Hargrove pulled his patrol SUV behind the Mercedes and stepped out almost immediately. The flashing lights reflected across the gas pumps and store windows as several people nearby stopped to watch. From the moment he walked toward the driver's side door, his attitude was already aggressive. No greeting, no explanation, no professional tone. He stopped beside the window and looked directly at Judge Brooks. "Whose vehicle is this?" Not "good evening." Not "do you know why I stopped you?" Just a sharp question filled with suspicion. Judge Brooks lowered her window slowly and looked at him calmly. Her face showed no fear, no anger, and no confusion. But inside her mind, alarms were already going off. After more than 20 years handling civil rights cases, she recognized the situation immediately. This was not a lawful traffic stop based on a clear violation. This was a fishing expedition. A stop built on assumption instead of evidence. She kept her voice steady. "Deputy, why exactly was I pulled over?" For a brief second, Hargrove hesitated. Then he ignored the question completely. "License and registration." Judge Brooks noticed it instantly. That was the first major mistake. Any trained officer knows they must clearly explain the reason for a detention when asked. But Hargrove was too focused on control to realize what he had already done. He had started the stop without naming a traffic violation, without explaining reasonable suspicion, without describing any criminal activity. And now his body camera was recording every second of it. Judge Brooks handed him her documents calmly, but she was already studying him the same way she studied witnesses in court. The quick breathing, the tense shoulders, the forced confidence. To most people, Deputy Hargrove probably looked in control. To her, he looked like an officer trying to justify a stop after making it. And with every passing second, the situation was getting worse for him. Judge Brooks never raised her voice. She did not argue. She did not insult the deputy or become emotional. Instead, she did something far more dangerous for Deputy Hargrove. She started asking questions, calm questions, precise questions, the kind of questions trained officers are supposed to answer easily if they are following proper procedure. "Deputy, what traffic violation initiated this stop?" Hargrove looked away for a second and adjusted the radio on his shoulder. "You were driving suspiciously in the area." Judge Brooks stayed calm. Suspiciously is not a traffic violation. For the first time, the deputy seemed slightly unsure. He shifted his weight and glanced toward the gas station parking lot, where a few people were still watching. Then Judge Brooks asked another question. "Do you suspect this vehicle is stolen?" Hargrove opened his mouth, but no clear answer came out. "I'm just conducting an investigation." That response only made things worse. Judge Brooks already understood what was happening. The deputy had stopped her first and was now trying to invent a reason afterward, and every second was being recorded. She asked one more question. "Are you alleging criminal activity, or are you conducting a consensual encounter?" This time, there was silence. Real silence. Deputy Hargrove stared at her for a moment without answering. The confidence he walked up with was beginning to crack. His body camera captured the pause clearly. Judge Brooks noticed everything. The nervous breathing, the tightened jaw, the way his tone kept changing. Most drivers would have felt intimidated standing there under flashing lights with an armed deputy leaning beside the window. But Judge Brooks was not most drivers. She understood exactly how unlawful stops unfolded, and she knew something Hargrove did not. Every weak answer he gave was tightening the trap around himself, and the deputy still believed he was the one in control. He had no idea that his own words were becoming evidence. At this point, the entire stop had already started changing. Deputy Hargrove expected fear, silence, and quick compliance. Instead, he found himself standing in front of someone who understood every mistake he was making in real time. And you could almost feel the tension growing with every question Judge Brooks asked. Because once an officer loses control of the conversation, small mistakes can quickly become career-ending ones, especially when body cameras are recording everything. The truth is, most people freeze during traffic stops. Some stay quiet because they are scared things could get worse. Others try to defend themselves and end up escalating the situation without meaning to. That's why this moment matters so much. Judge Brooks stayed calm, controlled, and careful with every word she used. She never shouted. She never threatened the deputy. She simply forced him to explain actions he could not legally defend. And the deeper he went, the harder it became for him to recover. So let me ask you something. If this happened to you during a traffic stop, would you stay silent and avoid conflict? Or would you challenge the officer directly the way Judge Brooks did? Drop your answer in the comments and be honest. Because what happens next shows exactly how dangerous it can become when an officer realizes the person they stopped is not backing down. At that moment, Deputy Hargrove still had a way out. He could have stepped back from the window. He could have returned Judge Brooks' license and registration. He could have ended the stop before the situation became something much bigger. But instead of backing down, he made the worst decision possible. He escalated. The deputy looked around the gas station parking lot again. More people were watching now. A man near the store entrance had his phone raised, clearly recording. Another customer stood beside a gas pump, staring directly at the patrol SUV. Hargrove could feel control slipping away. And for someone like him, that mattered more than procedure. His voice became louder. Step out of the vehicle now. Judge Brooks stayed calm. Deputy, are you ordering me out based on a specific crime? The question irritated him immediately. Instead of answering, he reached for the driver's side door handle himself. That moment changed everything. Several witnesses later said the entire situation became more tense the second he touched the vehicle. Even the deputy's body camera showed a sudden shift in his behavior. His breathing became heavier. His words became sharper. Judge Brooks understood exactly what was happening. Hargrove was no longer thinking carefully about policy or law. He was reacting emotionally. He could not stand the idea of looking wrong in front of strangers, especially not in front of a black woman calmly questioning his authority. And that single moment of ego would eventually destroy the career he had spent nearly 20 years building. Because once he physically escalated the stop without clear legal grounds, the situation crossed into dangerous territory. Now the body camera was no longer recording a questionable traffic stop. It was recording potential civil rights violations in real time. And Deputy Hargrove still did not understand how serious his mistake had become. Judge Brooks looked directly at Deputy Hargrove as his hand rested on the door handle. Her expression never changed. She stayed calm while the flashing patrol lights reflected across the side of the Mercedes, and several bystanders continued recording from nearby. Then she finally spoke plainly. Deputy, my name is Alana Brooks. I am a judge for the United States District Court. For the first time since the stop began, Hargrove froze, just for a second. But it was enough. The confidence in his face weakened. His shoulders stiffened slightly, and his eyes narrowed as he tried to process what he had just heard. Judge Brooks continued speaking in the same calm tone. I have spent years presiding over constitutional rights cases, including unlawful detention and illegal search claims. The deputy said nothing. I understand exactly how these cases are investigated, she added. And I understand exactly how departments defend stops that were never lawful to begin with. The parking lot suddenly felt quieter. Even the people recording nearby seemed to sense the shift happening in real time. Deputy Hargrove stepped back from the vehicle door slowly. Not much. Just enough for the camera to catch the change in his body language. Moments earlier, he had acted completely certain of himself. Now he looked unsure, not fully afraid, not fully calm, but uncertain. And uncertainty was dangerous for an officer who had already pushed the stop too far. Judge Brooks could see it happening. For the first time that night, Hargrove realized the woman inside the car was not just another driver he could pressure into silence. She knew the law, she knew the procedure, and worse for him, she knew exactly how damaging this footage could become once supervisors, lawyers, and investigators reviewed it later. The deputy still had a chance to stop the damage. but the night was already slipping out of his control. Judge Brooks kept her hands visible on the steering wheel as she spoke. Her voice stayed calm and controlled, almost quiet compared to the flashing lights and growing tension around them. But every word landed hard. Deputy, your body camera is documenting an unlawful detention, unsupported by reasonable suspicion. Deputy Hargrove blinked and looked down for a moment, almost like he suddenly remembered. The camera attached to his chest had been recording the entire encounter from the beginning. Judge Brooks continued without raising her voice. Your department will receive preservation notices by tomorrow morning. The deputy's face tightened immediately. People nearby were still recording with their phones. One man near the gas station entrance moved closer to hear better. Another witness later said the deputy looked completely different after hearing the word preservation. Because officers understand exactly what that means. It means the footage cannot disappear. It cannot be deleted. It becomes evidence. Then Judge Brooks delivered the part that changed the entire stop. And if this escalates further, she said calmly, federal litigation will follow shortly after. There was no anger in her tone, no yelling, no threats. That was what made it so powerful. She was not trying to scare him. She was explaining what would happen next, step by step, like someone reading from a timeline that had already been written. For the first time that night, Deputy Hargrove looked completely unsure of himself. His eyes shifted toward the patrol SUV, then toward the people recording nearby, and finally back toward Judge Brooks. He understood something now that he had failed to understand earlier. This was no longer just a traffic stop. Every decision he made from this point forward could follow him for the rest of his life. And deep down, he was beginning to realize something even worse. Judge Brooks had warned him clearly, but he might already be too late to fix the damage. By this point, the entire energy of the stop had changed. Deputy Hargrove started the encounter believing he was fully in control. But once Judge Brooks revealed who she was and began naming the exact legal problems with the stop, the situation shifted fast. And honestly, this is where many officers make their biggest mistakes. Instead of stepping back and correcting the problem, they double down because they do not want to look weak, embarrassed, or wrong in public, especially when cameras are recording. You could already see that pressure building on Hargrove's face. Every witness nearby was watching closely. Every word was being captured on Bodycam footage. And now he knew the woman in front of him understood the law better than he did. But even after all of that, he still had one final chance to calm the situation down and walk away from it. So what do you think? Should Deputy Hargrove have ended the stop the moment Judge Brooks identified herself? Or was his ego already too involved for him to admit he made a mistake? Comment your thoughts below, because what happens next would turn a bad traffic stop into something much bigger than anyone at that gas station expected. By now, nearly everyone at the gas station understood something serious was happening. The flashing patrol lights had turned a normal evening into a public scene, and people nearby were paying close attention to every word being said. Several witnesses already had their phones out. One man standing beside the gas pumps recorded the entire stop from across the parking lot. Another witness near the sidewalk captured clear audio as Deputy Hargrove continued, speaking with Judge Brooks. A woman walking out of the station store stopped beside her car and quietly started recording too. And above all of it, Deputy Hargrove's body camera continued documenting every second. There was no confusion anymore. Everything was being preserved. Every command, every question, every moment where the deputy failed to explain why the stop had even started. The footage captured his changing tone, his hesitation, and the exact moment his confidence began slipping away after Judge Brooks identified herself. It also captured something even more damaging: the contradictions. At one moment, he called the stop an investigation. Minutes earlier, he suggested the vehicle looked suspicious. But he still could not clearly name a traffic violation or specific crime. To investigators reviewing the footage later, those details would matter a lot, because unlawful stops often fall apart the same way. Small mistakes, weak explanations, changing stories, and cameras that never stop recording. Judge Brooks understood that better than anyone standing in that parking lot. She knew every second of footage was becoming evidence that could later be slowed down, replayed, and examined frame by frame inside a courtroom. Deputy Hargrove seemed to understand it too now, but by then the damage was already done. The stop had become airtight documentation of a deputy slowly losing control while the cameras kept rolling. The stop ended later that night, but the real damage was only beginning. Before midnight, clips from the gas station were already spreading online. Witnesses uploaded phone videos showing Deputy Hargrove arguing with Judge Brooks while she calmly questioned the legality of the stop. But the videos from bystanders were only part of the problem. Inside the sheriff's office, command staff had already started reviewing the body camera footage, and what they saw created immediate concern. The deputy never clearly explained the reason for the stop. His answers changed several times during the encounter, and the moment he reached for the vehicle door, without clearly stating legal grounds, stood out immediately to supervisors reviewing the footage. Internal Affairs contacted senior command staff that same night. The conversation was serious enough that several supervisors were called back into the office early the next morning. By the following afternoon, Deputy Daniel Hargrove was officially placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His patrol credentials were suspended. His department-issued firearm was surrendered. And for the first time in nearly 20 years, he was ordered off the street. But the investigation did not stop with that one traffic stop. Once investigators started reviewing the footage, they began asking a larger question. If Hargrove acted this way while cameras and witnesses were present, how many other stops had happened when nobody was watching? That question changed everything. Investigators quietly pulled reports connected to his name. Old traffic stops were reviewed. Prior citizen complaints were reopened. Body camera footage from earlier encounters was requested from department archives. And as more supervisors watched the recordings, a pattern slowly began to appear. One stop had now become something much bigger. Because once departments begin looking backward, officers with long histories often become nervous for a reason. And Deputy Hargrove was quickly learning that his past was no longer buried safely inside old files. At this point, the situation had already gone far beyond a normal traffic stop. Deputy Hargrove was off patrol. Investigators were reviewing old cases, and the body camera footage was now being examined frame by people inside the department. And honestly, this raises a bigger question. What should happen when body camera footage appears to show a possible constitutional violation? Some people believe officers should stay on active duty until a full investigation is completed. Others believe the moment clear footage raises serious legal concerns, officers should be removed from the street immediately to protect the public and preserve trust. Because once people lose confidence in fair policing, rebuilding that trust becomes extremely difficult. In this case, the department acted fast. But many viewers watching this story will probably ask the same thing. Would the response have been this quick if the woman in that car had not been a federal judge? That question matters. And it is one reason stories like this create so much public attention online. So let me ask you directly. Should officers automatically be suspended whenever credible body camera footage shows a possible constitutional violation? Or should departments wait until every investigation is fully complete before taking action? Tell me what you think in the comments. Because what investigators discovered next would make the situation even worse for Deputy Hargrove and the Sheriff's Department. As investigators dug deeper into Deputy Hargrove's record, they quickly realized the gas station stop was not an isolated incident. It was part of something much larger. Over the previous 8 years, Hargrove had conducted hundreds of discretionary traffic stops across the county. Many happened late at night in wealthy neighborhoods where deputies often claimed they were looking for suspicious activity. But when investigators compared reports, body camera footage, and arrest records, troubling patterns began to appear. A large number of the stops involved black drivers, especially black drivers in expensive vehicles, especially in high-income areas. And many of those stops shared the same problem: weak explanations, missing details, and no clearly documented probable cause. In several reports, Hargrove used vague phrases like acting suspicious or did not appear to belong in the area. Investigators noticed that some reports failed to describe any actual traffic violation at all. That raised serious concerns, because officers are required to justify stops with clear facts, not personal assumptions. Then the investigation became even more serious. Several prior arrests connected to Hargrove's traffic stops were suddenly reopened for review. Defense attorneys who had lost earlier suppression hearings requested copies of old body camera footage. Civil rights groups started asking questions publicly. One former driver even claimed he had experienced almost the exact same kind of stop 2 years earlier, but never had the money to fight it in court. The deeper investigators looked, the worse things became. What first appeared to be one deputy making one bad decision at a gas station was slowly turning into evidence of a long-running pattern that had been ignored for years. And inside the sheriff's office, people were starting to worry about something much bigger than one lawsuit. They were starting to worry about how many cases might collapse if the public saw the full picture. Months after the gas station stop, the investigation reached a breaking point. Federal investigators announced civil rights charges connected to unlawful detention practices, tied to several traffic stops, including the encounter with Judge Brooks. The news spread quickly across the county. For years, Deputy Hargrove had been the officer asking questions, giving commands, and placing other people in handcuffs. Now federal agents were preparing to arrest him. The arrest happened early in the morning outside the sheriff's substation, where he once started his patrol shifts. According to witnesses, several former co-workers were already inside the parking lot when two federal vehicles pulled up near the entrance. People stopped talking almost immediately. Everyone understood what was happening. Hargrove stepped out of his truck wearing plain clothes instead of a uniform. The same deputy who once walked through those doors with confidence now stood silently, while federal agents approached him with paperwork in hand. No lights, no sirens, just quiet tension. Witnesses later said Hargrove looked shocked more than angry. One former deputy claimed he barely spoke while the agents explained the charges and placed him into custody. Several co-workers watched from a distance without saying a word, because by then, the body camera footage, witness videos, and reopened investigations had already changed how people inside the department saw him. His law enforcement career was finished. The badge, the authority, the years of experience, none of it could protect him anymore. And now, for the first time in his life, Deputy Daniel Hargrove faced the same fear many drivers had once felt during his own traffic stops. Uncertainty, loss of control, and the possibility that his freedom itself was now at risk. The man who once believed nobody would seriously challenge him was suddenly standing on the other side of the justice system. The sheriff's department moved quickly once the federal indictment became public. Just days after the charges were announced, Deputy Daniel Hargrove was officially terminated from the department he had served for nearly 20 years. The termination letter stated that investigators found repeated violations of departmental policy and constitutional protections during traffic enforcement encounters. In simple terms, they believed he had crossed legal lines again and again, and this time, there was too much evidence to ignore. During the trial, prosecutors focused heavily on the body camera footage from the gas station stop involving Judge Brooks. They replayed key moments for the jury, showing how Hargrove failed to clearly explain the reason for the stop and repeatedly changed his justification during the encounter. But prosecutors argued the case was about more than one traffic stop. They said the investigation uncovered a pattern of selective enforcement unsupported by lawful procedure. That sentence stayed in the courtroom long after it was spoken, because it described exactly what investigators believed had been happening for years. Witnesses testified about earlier encounters. Former drivers described similar stops. Experts explained how constitutional protections are supposed to limit police authority during traffic detentions. And as the trial continued, the evidence kept building. By the time closing arguments ended, many people inside the courtroom already sensed what was coming next. The jury did not deliberate for very long. When the verdict was read, the courtroom became completely silent. Several former deputies sitting in the back lowered their heads. Others stared straight ahead without reacting. Inside the sheriff's department, the decision sent shockwaves through every level of command, because the case had exposed more than one deputy's actions. It exposed how warnings, complaints, and questionable stops had been ignored for years, until one encounter finally forced the entire system into public view. The lawsuit settlement forced the sheriff's office to make changes that could no longer be delayed. For years, complaints about unfair stops and abuse of power had been ignored. Now, federal officials demanded action. One of the biggest changes was the start of mandatory bias and constitutional policing audits. Outside experts would regularly examine the department's behavior and look for patterns of racial profiling or unlawful policing. Deputies would no longer be trusted to investigate themselves without oversight. The settlement also expanded body camera retention rules. Videos from traffic stops and arrests would now be stored for much longer periods. Officials believed this would protect evidence and stop recordings from disappearing before investigations could begin. Another reform focused on discretionary traffic stops. Independent reviewers would now examine stops made without clear evidence of a crime. The goal was to make sure deputies could not use weak excuses to stop drivers unfairly. The sheriff's office was also ordered to submit quarterly compliance reports to federal authorities. Every few months, department leaders had to prove the reforms were being followed. Those reports included training records, complaint investigations, and body camera reviews. Civil rights retraining became mandatory for every patrol deputy in the department. Deputies attended classes on constitutional rights, lawful searches, racial bias, and the limits of police authority. Instructors reminded them that citizens were protected by the law, even during investigations and traffic stops. To make sure the department obeyed the settlement, the court appointed an external monitor to oversee the reforms for the next 3 years. The monitor had the power to inspect records, review complaints, and observe department policies in action. Many people in the community believed the reforms exposed problems that had existed inside the sheriff's office for years. Others hoped the changes would prevent another family from experiencing the same pain and humiliation again. In the end, the story was never only about one deputy or one traffic stop. It was about something much larger and far more dangerous. It showed what can happen when unconstitutional behavior becomes normal inside a system where very few people are willing or able to challenge it. For years, many drivers had likely stayed silent after experiences that felt unfair or humiliating. Some feared retaliation. Others believed nobody would listen. Many simply did not know their rights well enough to fight back. When that silence continues for too long, bad behavior can slowly become accepted as normal. That was what made Judge Brooks different. He understood the law deeply enough to recognize the danger while it was happening in real time. He knew the Constitution was not optional. He also knew that authority without limits could quickly become abuse. Most people do not have that kind of legal knowledge during a stressful police stop. They may not know when an officer has crossed the line. They may not understand which rights protect them, or how to defend themselves without making the situation worse. The case revealed how easily fear and confusion can silence ordinary citizens. A simple traffic stop can become dangerous when one side fully understands the law and the other side does not. That is why stories like this matter. They remind people that constitutional rights only remain strong when they are understood, defended, and enforced. They also remind law enforcement agencies that public trust cannot survive without accountability. For many people who followed the case, the lesson remained painfully clear. A badge carries authority, but the Constitution must always carry more power. This case proved something many people already feared. Bad policing can continue for years when nobody has the power, knowledge, or resources to fight back publicly. Too often, people walk away from unfair encounters, feeling powerless, embarrassed, or afraid. Many never file complaints because they believe nothing will change. But this case also showed that the system can work when strong evidence becomes impossible to ignore. The body camera footage, witness accounts, and courtroom testimony forced people to pay attention. Once the facts became public, the pressure for accountability grew too large to avoid. Without clear evidence, the outcome could have been very different. The deputy's actions may have gone unchallenged. The department may never have faced outside investigation. The reforms that followed may never have happened at all. That is why accountability matters. It protects ordinary people from abuse of power and reminds public officials that their authority has limits. No badge places someone above the Constitution. Stories like this are important because they help people understand their rights before they find themselves in dangerous situations. Knowledge can protect people. Silence often protects misconduct. If this story opened your eyes, subscribe for more real accountability cases and investigations. Share this video with someone who needs to better understand their rights during police encounters. And now I want to hear from you. Do you think body cameras have truly changed police behavior? Or have they only changed what gets caught on video? Tell me in the comments.